40 years ago there was a match. Sports are meant to be play. A game is a game. Then we attach meaning and the experience turns into a story.
They are playing the final match and I can watch it because I get too nervous. But I'm watching the match. I'm not watching the match, I'm watching the match, the movie, the match, and I can stop crying.
Over a century of history between two nations seemed to tighten into one single afternoon. Into one match. And we did the only thing we knew. We played.
While they were playing the final match, World Cup 2026, yesterday I was watching the match. I'm not good with sports, I get too nervous watching football, so while people watch the sports, I usually watch movies. The match is an Argentinian documentary, 2026, directed by Juan Cabral and Santiago Franco, and it's a beautiful exploration of how sports, politics and history are entangled. The two main events being the Malvinas Falklands War in 82 and this particular match between Argentina and England in Mexico 86.
I'm afraid I just don't see him as enemy.
The movie has an explicit vibe. I wouldn't say message, but rather vibe against antagonism. And not even against, I would say beyond antagonism. But it's not preachy. That's beautiful about the movie. It's not simplistic. It doesn't simplify things. On the contrary, I would say that the movie is all about the complexities of this historical relationship between the two countries, England and Argentina, and how those complexities shaped this particular match and the story about this particular match and all its implications. So many details, beautiful details, fun and funny details. And the movie is beautifully woven together. First of all, it's very powerful to see a movie narrated in two languages at the same time, English and Spanish, especially when the film is precisely about this historical antagonism between the two nations, between the two people. And as a personal note, it's funny for me as an Argentinian that I'm here making this video in English for my channel in English, talking about this story in English. I haven't actually told so many people about this channel and these videos in English because I think there's a lot of prejudice and resentment still here. I think the wound is still open, is not healed yet, and you cannot rush those processes, of course. But I think experiences like this movie, well, I believe they help healing the divide.
I was scared of pretty girls and starting conversations, so all my friends.
The match made me think of this other movie by Lola Arias, Theater of War. Argentinian and English veterans from the Falklands, Malvinas War meet, they come together and they represent episodes of the war in a theatrical way. It's very interesting. And I think that when I thought of that other movie, that made me think that while in that movie it's theater, in this one, in the match, is sports that make us understand or get a glimpse on the absurdity of conflicts, of at least most of our conflicts. Sports, and particularly football, I don't know, there's a paradoxical thing about it, because on the one hand, I think football helps us channeling our competitive spirit or nature, so we transmute it into play. But on the other hand, I think football shows we are really immersed in that competitive spirit. Football brings out both play and horror. It can actually bring the worst out of us. I always remember this time when I met writer Liliana Bodoc in a convention like 10 years ago. Argentinian writer Liliana Bodoc. I asked her in the Q&A, how do you create complex characters in your books? And she said, you don't have to do that. You don't need to create complexity. We humans are already complex. And she gave this example, very personal example. She said, when I watch a soccer football match, I'm a very anti-racist person, she said, but when I see a football match, I would find myself screaming atrocities, terrible racist things to the opposite team. So what's going on there? Well, we are already complex, right?
Él lo que atacó fue la identidad inglesa, fue a por el banderín, ¿no?
Alf Ramsey running on the pitch and pulling the shirt back, saying we don't exchange shirts with animals.
And it's not football to blame, of course, but well, I wonder about whether competitive sports are helpful or damaging. And I think it's both. But it's not the sport, the sport is just a game. It's about what we do with the game. How do we add meaning to the experience? I mean, the sports are meant to be play, but we add a lot of meaning over the experience. And that's what I think happened in this particular match. And that's what this movie is about. Probably, I don't know what it is about. I don't want to define what it is about, but one way of reading the match, the movie, is that it shows us how we transform history into story. History into story. So I was watching the movie while they were still playing the final match. I mean, this time Argentina and Spain, not England, but it's the same. In a way, it felt crazy because I'm not so much of a patriot or anything. I'm not so much into football. So I was not invested in Argentina winning. And that probably allowed me, I think, to perceive some things. Like when you see someone really identified, invested in an activity, whatever that is, and you can see things they don't because they are really into it, like immersed. If you found me shooting a movie, for example, well, you'll probably see things about my behavior that I don't because I'm in that moment immersed in the game. So I think that as I was not seeing the game, I somehow connected to this collective emotion in another way, in another level, not better or worse, just in another way. So I kept reflecting on how we handle our collective emotion through different mediums such as sports and cinema, because in the end it's all about stories and symbols and handshakes and hands and fate, myth. Maybe the movie was so emotional for me, I kept crying and crying and crying the whole 91 minutes. It was so emotional, such an emotional and attractive experience for me because the movie shows how the match turned into a myth, and I'm really into that process of how human beings create meaning out of experience, transform experience into stories. The movie patiently shows how the myth was constructed, and maybe that's why I'm not so interested in watching the match in real time. It's probably not just that I get nervous because I'm more interested not so much in the experience, but in what people do with the experience. Not so much in the experience in itself, but in its elaboration.
Yo me puedo matar con tranquilidad. Te transformás en delantero. Puedes atacar por el lateral,
So yes, I didn't watch the match, but I watched the match with capitals, meaning a story, a match that turned into a match, capital M meaning a myth, as the present match with Spain, Argentina and Spain, was so long, I could finish the movie and started taking notes while the game was still going. And so I realized, I was taking notes, I realized they were in the middle of this uncertainty, this uncertain experience, what's going to happen, and I was not. I was connecting with how the experience, this other match was transformed into a story. So it was kind of crazy, like feeling the vibe in the air here in the city, and at the same time connecting with this story 40 years ago. So I kept thinking, story is play. 40 years ago there was a match, and then we transformed it into a story. Story is the way we play with experience. Story is what we do with experience. We transform experience into stories. For example, in relation to Maradona's hand, it's beautiful to see in the movie, in the match, how some of the English players move from outrage to awe, or at least fun.
How's that happened?
As if in the end they understood. It's a game, it was just a game. And I wonder if what the movie is doing is precisely that. It shows how the myth was crafted so we understand it's just a story, meaning it's just a game, a way in which we signify, we add meaning to experience, we play with experience. Probably that's what the final scene with English and Argentinian players playing, it's all about. It was a game. Of course, the war was not a game, but football is a game. A game is a game, then we attach meaning and the experience turns into a story. The story of an insisting war between two people. 40 years later, cinema deconstructs the way in which the game turned into a story, into that myth. Myth appears when we forget the experience was just an experience. In this case, the match was just a match, but we, as narrative animals, we transformed it into a story. I have the intuition that what the movie does, deconstructing how the match was manufactured into a myth, is to recover its nature as play. Not because we are now denying the entanglement between sports and politics, but because at least we can acknowledge that fighting is not the same as playing. Fighting is not the same as playing. When you fight, you need the other one to die. You want to kill the other one. Fighting is actually trying the game to end, trying to end the game by eliminating the other. When you play, when you actually play, you need the other one alive to play. If the other one is not there, there's no play anymore. There's no playing anymore. So if the war was not a game, football never stopped being a game, even when we forgot and still forget the difference between fighting and playing.
Well, it's a foul, but this is 1986.
I recommend you watching the documentary, The Match. Beautiful experience. Thanks for watching, thanks for listening, subscribe, comment, add your questions to the conversation, and see you in the next one.
It's too good.
Offside.
No cheating.